Okay, let's just dive right in. Welcome to today's explainer. We are going on a bit of a historical detective hunt today, looking into a genuinely provocative text called the SNBL manuscript, Redrawing Human History. What this manuscript attempts is, honestly, incredibly ambitious. It doesn't just treat the Quran as a book of theology. No, it uses it as a highly precise historical filter to challenge mainstream ancient archaeology, especially biblical archaeology. The author is basically arguing that much of what we just accept as standard ancient history has been heavily distorted, and if we re-examine the past through this specific lens, it literally changes our entire understanding of the Bronze Age, the prophets, and get this, even modern global conflicts. It's a dense, deeply researched hypothesis, and we're going to unpack the whole shebang together.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the basic hypotheses of human history. 2. The crisis of the Ummah and identity. Number 3 is the linguistic mystery of the term pharaoh. 4, we'll look at the evidence of the Rhind mathematical papyrus. 5 covers the Hyksos and the Thera eruption. And finally, Section 6, the Quran as a historical filter.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the basic hypothesis of human history, and how it challenges the established archaeological narrative.
You know, the author's motivation for this whole deep dive is actually really fascinating. They assert that the modern crises we see all around us aren't just random, disconnected political events. Instead, they're the symptom of a massive, foundational historical distortion. The manuscript claims that the field of biblical archaeology has basically been driven for a long time by Western theological narratives. Narratives that, according to the author, actually manipulate findings to justify political claims, like the concept of the Promised Land, for example. The text argues that when we just uncritically swallow these flawed histories, we lose our footing. We lose our epistemological grounding. So the author is trying to trace current global struggles all the way back to this fundamental misunderstanding of the ancient world.
Which brings us to Section 2, the crisis of the Ummah and identity, and the very real impact of history on geopolitics. To give you an idea of the scale here, the manuscript points to 25 specific modern crises. And it's a brilliant way to illustrate just how broad this argument is. We're talking about everything from severe geopolitical conflicts like the displacement in Palestine and the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya, to massive economic issues like debt and inflation in Muslim nations. It even touches on the rise of secularism and educational deficits, the brain drain. These are incredibly heavy, complex issues, right? Well, the text impartially connects all of them back to one central thesis, that these modern crises are the direct fallout of abandoning Quranic guidance and adopting flawed external historical narratives. The author is basically saying that when history gets rewritten by imperial powers, the people who forget their true foundations end up losing their identity and their strength.
Now, let's move on to Section 3, the linguistic mystery of the term pharaoh. This is an absolutely crucial clue.
Okay, so the manuscript points out this really fascinating historical anomaly, and it's actually something Egyptologists know very well. The title pharaoh, which originally just meant great house or referred to the palace itself, wasn't actually widely adopted as a title for the ruler until the New Kingdom era. But here's the catch. The biblical narrative uses the term pharaoh universally across all eras of Egyptian history. The Quranic narrative, on the other hand, is incredibly specific. It uses al-Malik, meaning king, for the ruler during Prophet Yusuf or Joseph's era. But then it switches to Pharaoh or Pharaoh for the ruler during Prophet Musa or Moses' era. The author uses this stark linguistic precision to argue that the Quran is perfectly historically accurate because it recognizes this distinct shift in Egyptian political structures between those two time periods.
So, that naturally brings up the question, who exactly was this king during Yusuf's time? The manuscript puts forward the hypothesis that Prophet Yusuf lived during the Hyksos period in Egypt. If you're not familiar, the Hyksos were a group of Semitic rulers from the Levant who essentially assimilated into the Egyptian system during what's called the Second Intermediate Period. And this perfectly explains why the Quran doesn't use the word pharaoh here. Think about it. A Semitic foreigner like Yusuf could realistically rise to a massive administrative position, like managing the entire nation's agriculture, under a fellow Semitic administration. That kind of upward mobility would have been virtually impossible under a native Egyptian pharaoh.
That perfectly sets up Section 4, the evidence of the Rhind mathematical papyrus and ancient economic systems.
This brings us to a major piece of tangible evidence, the famous Rhind mathematical papyrus. This dates back to around 1550 BCE, which lines up right with the end of the Hyksos era. The author actually introduces this specific papyrus as their smoking gun evidence. Because it turns out, this thing isn't just some ancient high school math textbook.
It's effectively a state survival guide. It's a literal manual for state administration, calculating grain distribution, agricultural accounting, logistical planning, the whole 9 yards. And this perfectly mirrors the exact role Yusuf played in Egypt, according to the Quran, managing the economy to survive 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine.
And honestly, this is where it gets incredibly fascinating. Just look at the mathematical correlation here. One of the most famous problems in the Rind papyrus involves calculating exactly 7 houses, which have 7 cats, that catch 7 mice, that eat 7 ears of corn. You see where this is going. The manuscript aligns this directly with the Quranic narrative of the king's dream, the one Yusuf famously interprets. 7 fat cows eaten by 7 lean cows, and 7 green ears of corn. The author makes the case that in both the ancient Egyptian administrative mind and the prophetic tradition, the number 7 wasn't just random. It represented cosmic completeness and serious economic planning. The papyrus essentially proves that the exact type of logistical, mathematical agriculture Yusuf implemented was a documented reality in Hyksos-era Egypt.
Moving right along to Section 5, the Hyksos and the Thera eruption, focusing on the environmental impacts.
Now, we have physical artifacts to back this up. These are actual scarab seals from the Hyksos era. And what's absolutely amazing here is that these seals bear clearly Semitic names like Kisyan and Yaqub Bahar. The manuscript actually links the name Yaqub Bahar directly to Prophet Yusuf's father, Prophet Yaqub, or Jacob. The text suggests that the network of Prophet Yusuf's family wasn't just, a small band of wandering nomads. No, they were part of a highly sophisticated, interconnected Semitic administration that stretched all the way from Canaan down into the Egyptian delta, engaging in massive international trade.
But, as we know, this thriving Hyksos era didn't last forever. The manuscript dives deep into the complex scientific debate around radiocarbon dating and the Minoan eruption of the island of Thera. This was a completely catastrophic volcanic event. The text navigates the intense debate between different archaeological chronologies, and it argues that these massive geological events, we're talking giant ash clouds blocking out the sun, triggering global climate cooling, are the exact environmental triggers for that severe 7-year global famine, the very same famine that brought Yusuf's family into Egypt in the first place.
To navigate all these really complex timelines, the author leans heavily on a powerful idea from the renowned archaeologist Manfred Bietek. He famously warned, and I quote, "Never follow herd instincts or fashionable trends in science and scholarship." The manuscript uses this quote as a major caution against just blindly trusting popular timelines, especially ones that try to force the physical evidence to match a preconceived biblical chronology. Instead, the author argues that we absolutely have to look at the hard physical strata of the earth alongside the uncorrupted text of the Quran.
Let's take a quick look at the timeline the manuscript constructs to pull all this together. Around 1628 BCE, you have the Antioch second eruption, which causes massive climate cooling and famine. This is the famine of Yusuf's era. During this exact time, the Hyksos, with Semitic administrators like Yusuf, are the ones managing the crisis in Egypt. Later on, the massive Thera eruption occurs, which eventually leads to the weakening and retreat of the Hyksos around 1550 BCE. This is when native Egyptian pharaohs take back power. This would be the king who did not know Joseph. And that massive power shift sets the stage just a few generations later for the oppression of the Israelites and the eventual exodus of Prophet Musa, somewhere between 1500 and 1450 BCE. It really is like a giant puzzle finally coming together.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the Quran as a historical filter and restoring balance.
The entire manuscript really centers on this core concept of Furqan. If you don't know, Furqan translates to a standard or a criterion, a tool used to filter and distinguish truth from falsehood. The author positions the Quran not merely as a book of spiritual guidance, but as a hyper-precise epistemological tool, a literal Furqan used to verify ancient history. So, when ancient texts, archaeological interpretations, or even modern political claims contradict one another, the manuscript argues that the linguistic precision of the Quran acts as the ultimate filter to correct those corrupted historical records.
The author points directly to verses like Surah Yusuf, verse 111, which explicitly states that these prophetic narratives are not just invented myths, they are factual confirmations of what came before, serving as a detailed explanation. The manuscript's whole goal is to show that when you actually look at the physical evidence, whether it's the Rind papyrus, the Hyksos scarabs, or the global volcanic data, it all snaps into focus perfectly when it's filtered through this text.
So we're going to end things today with a pretty provocative question. We started out by looking at modern crises, right? Displacement, loss of identity,
economic struggles. Well, the manuscript makes the case that these issues aren't disconnected from the Bronze Age at all. By accepting distorted histories, societies fundamentally lose their balance. So we have to ask ourselves, is ancient history merely a fragment of the past? Or is understanding it correctly the absolute key to restoring balance to the world today? It's a genuinely fascinating hypothesis, and it definitely leaves us with a whole lot to think about when it comes to how the past truly shapes our present.